Tom, it's great to be here with you.
Thanks, Bill. Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
We have been working on challenges in law firms for a long time. Both share a real passion around data. You've gone off and started something new. So why have you done that?
Yeah, the genesis for this actually started pre-COVID several years ago. In my prior consulting practice, we started getting queries from a number of law firms from their leadership teams, not just from a CIO or CKO or CMO, but the managing partner, the chairperson, the leadership. We're asking questions that were stressing the firm in their ability to turn around prompt responses. And the leadership of the firms started to become more inquisitive and recognizing that whether it's pressure from clients or competitors, that they wanted to make decisions that were rooted in data and not so much gut instinct. And we started doing some custom projects to build data platforms and data lakes. And I realized that there was an opportunity to bring something to the market that would allow firms to be able to take advantage of this technology more cost effectively and more quickly. And so wrote a business plan for it. Serendipitously, right around the same time I did that, a good buddy of mine that I've known almost as long as I've known you, Andrew Sager, reached out, and we'd collaborated many years ago when he started Relativity, and we got together and he offered to fund the business, and then COVID hit and I got cold feet and finally realized that if I didn't do it now, I wasn't going to do it. So we kicked back up conversations and started the business earlier this year.
Well, I'm glad you've jumped in and are doing it. You needed to go create your own thing. It's awesome.
It's been a minute. Yeah, it's been a journey to get to this point, but certainly something I've always had in mind to try and take a shot at running my own thing.
And we've been talking about how like firms' perspective on data, I mean, it's different today. Like there's a level of attention here that wasn't necessarily what we were seeing before.
Yeah, I mean, if you go back, even I would say 5, 7 years, firms weren't really looking at their business the same way they are today. And it's not just younger law firm leaders coming into power, it's new leadership of any kind realizing that there's too many market pressures that are forcing them to look at things differently. In the old days, hey, we raise rates 6% every year, we send bills, we get paid, there's a Q4 collection push that we have to factor into our cash flow, and that's really our business model. And for a long time, firms could get away with that, and still there's firms today that are able to do that and be successful. But for most firms, they're recognizing that they have to look at data differently. They're seeing it again. Their client base is pushing them harder. Where they're seeing competition from not only their own peers but also ALSPs and the Big Four. Investments in AI obviously have triggered a lot of conversation, and AI is only as good as the data you throw at it. So certainly there's interest in getting their arms around their data for those kinds of use cases. But yeah, it's been fascinating to kind of look back over the last quarter century, which is scary to think about. What changes have I seen or witnessed? And certainly we're always behind in legal a little bit, and I think it's finally come to fruition that law firms want to run with better data and have decisions that are rooted in data. And that trickles down to how the rest of the C-suite and the leadership team operate. They're either individual administrative departments or business units. It's been really fascinating, and I only see that continuing. Firms have been starting to realize that they needed to get their arms around their data. There's many firms that have built their own data platforms in a variety of different technologies. Certainly, Microsoft has made a huge splash around data. I think that's also helped socialize the notion that data is important. If you watched Build last spring, it used to be a developer conference, and they may as well have just rebranded it Data and AI because that's all it really was. And so Microsoft's made a big splash around data. Certainly that's created a buzz that's helped law firm leadership start to turn their attention towards it. And also firms finally getting comfortable being in the cloud. Maybe life's all about timing. 2 years ago, this would have been a very different conversation to put all your data in Azure, but now firms are a lot more comfortable with the notion that they can do that and do it securely and successfully.
Yeah, it's really, I mean, it's really about drumbeat that I've been on for a long time, which is integration, right? You have all of these separate information stores in a firm, and so what you're really talking about is how do you pull that together, make sense of it, rationalize all that information.
Yeah, it's really hard. We don't have big data in law firms. We have broad data, right? We have maybe 20 or 30 line of business systems that a firm may rely on to run some portion of their business. And even yesterday, I was on a call with a firm, and we like to call these big tent projects. It can't just be marketing driving it. It can't just be finance or HR. They've all got to get together. And one of the conversation points was, well, the way we in finance decide what an FTE is different than what HR thinks about an FTE. And I said, well, we can handle that either way, but maybe this is an opportunity for the firm to make a decision and have one point of clarity on how we consider FTEs and lawyers. And so those integration points, we've largely been working in these silos, and that's been, to your point earlier, Bill, it's been adequate to operate that way for some time. And we've built, I like to call data debt. There's technology debt. We've built up data debt in law firms. We've got all these silos of data. And if you ask a firm how many lawyers they have, the answer is always, well, it depends on who you ask, right? If I ask HR or accounting, marketing, they've all got different answers because they've all
got some lawyers just hiding in the closet. We don't know. We don't know what's going on. I love that term, data debt. That's awesome.
I made that one up the other day, so I figure I'll stick with it. And so, yeah, the integration challenge is not trivial, and we've got lots of really robust systems that are easily integrated, and then we've got we still got a lot of legacy mom and pop vendors in legal, right, that we all rely on. And so there's challenges bringing up systems that are really well known and popular, and ones that aren't quite as mature, and trying to rationalize all that and give a firm a single source of truth. It's a lot of really ugly, unsexy data engineering work that's happening behind the scenes to do all that.
Yeah, and your perspective is really about breaking all those silos down, which you've got this mix of cloud and on-prem, and the work may not be sexy, but the end result's pretty sexy when you actually get to have everything pulled together in one place.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And then you start thinking about the use cases. We talked about law firm leadership becoming much more, inquisitive around data. I was talking to a COO when I first started the business, and she said, Tom, just this week I got asked by our leadership team, so that's the managing partner, executive committee, hey, we want a return to work compliance report. And everyone in that room thought it was just a push button. Hey, it's technology, it's data. Certainly you have access to it. Well, what they didn't realize is that means card swipe reader data from a bunch of different systems. It means geolocated login data mashed up with HR. That's not easy, right? The report's sexy, the report's cool, but to get that together is not easy. And the next day, the same COOs asked for a spin on a DE&I report from a client that, again, they think is push button. It's not. And so all that really hard engineering work can yield these really cool results, whether it's responding to those, kind of ad hoc requests, building. What the other thing we're seeing is firms are trying to sort of elevate their internal financial reporting and use Power BI in a more meaningful way. And there's lots of vendors out there doing financial reporting, but being able to have a single source of truth that's disconnected a little bit from the line of business system and their individual limitations around reporting, and saying, I just have all the data now and I can point Power BI at it and run any kind of report I want. It's pretty cool and make it look modern and beautiful. Those are very interesting use cases. The other thing we're seeing firms do is they're leaning into a lot of, MarTech, RevTech solutions that help identify revenue opportunities or experience management systems. Those are, colloquially, I call them data hungry systems, right? So whether it's in, foundation experience management implementation or something like origami, those all require a heavy dose of data from lots of different places. And those by themselves are big data projects. And imagine a world where I don't have to build up yet another data silo and creating data debt now that I've got a separate, yet another system that requires its own, combination of people, organization, and matter data. I can do it one time and have it power everything going forward. It's pretty compelling. And then, of course, all the AI stuff, right? So right now, firms are looking at AI in very kind of niche use cases, which makes perfect sense. A lot of them are around work product and documents. There's a whole greenfield opportunity of use cases for AI that are on the we call it the practice of law and the business of law. And the business of law is a little underserved in these use cases, and there's lots of low-hanging fruit to solve for some really simple problems to make lawyers more productive that don't infringe on their ability to bill time, that you can solve for once you've loaded up a good chunk of your firm's data and point it at an AI tool in a secure way, of course.
Well, and you're capturing there one of my favorite subjects, which is the importance of data management for AI, which I think gets skipped over a little bit, which is great data is what really powers useful AI.
Yeah, and it's one of the nice things about the approach we're taking is you get to see. It's the best way to say this, that it's really hard to do data governance in a vacuum. It's really hard to do proper data hygiene on a sheet of paper or in a conference room or in a memo. You've got to see the data, you've got to touch it, you've got to identify where the bodies are buried, and sometimes you don't even know where the bodies are buried. I was doing a project for a big firm before I started the business, and unbeknownst to firm leadership, um, three different departments had their own industry taxonomy codes. So marketing was using one set of codes to describe matters that was not at all the same set of codes that accounting was using, and not at all set the same set of codes that intake was using. And nobody realized that. It's such a big firm that they didn't talk to each other. And so we only through some exploration as a group did we identify this is before you load up all this, you all got to sort this out. Like no software is going to fix this for you. Well, maybe, Sally might help a little bit, but you don't find those problems out until you have a problem to try and solve and go after. And so I feel strongly that, strong systems are great, but you have to have governance, and you've got to have a way to illuminate some of these pain points. And some of the best ways to do that is to actually crack open your data and see what's there. And oftentimes there's things that you just aren't simply aware of as an organization until you dig into it.
Yeah, I mean, we're here less than a year into the ChatGPT experiment, which has, brought all this attention on AI. Everybody's already using AI. Like it sounds like this is this brand new thing, but every law firm is using AI right this second. It's really useful AI because you don't call it AI. It's like it's actually doing something. What I find fascinating about this is that for a lot of firms, I think continuing their investment in KM would actually be the best thing they could be doing around AI right now, as opposed to actually the new generative AI things that everybody's excited about, which are going to have payoffs down the road. But it's just so early that it's really hard to make great decisions about that.
Yeah, if you look and read what most folks that have been successful in any AI journey, they're curating a very niche subset of work product for the AI to work off against. That can be a really hard effort by itself if you don't have good KM already in place that's been curating, a library of precedents and forms and know-how that you can draw from. Starting that from scratch is really hard, and maintaining it. Okay, great. So now some changes in the law have happened. Who's staying on top of those changes to make sure that the models that the AI is training, the documents the AI is training against? And I know everyone says you don't need you still need documents if you're going to feed it a subset to be able to answer very specific questions around specific types of documents. You've got to make sure those documents that you're pointing the AI at are up to date, and someone has to stay on top of that. And again, firms that have mature, well-functioning KM programs already have a mechanism in place to make sure that someone's staying on top of changes in the law and making sure that what they're feeding is the best of the firm. And without that in place, then you're starting from ground zero. And that is a really hard lift. You see firms that are jumping into this, building, AI committees, and in legal, we're so overreactive to stuff, right? So it's like, okay, we need an AI committee. Great, let's do that. And they should. Um, but then the new car smell wears off, and then 6 months later, that same person who's been given sort of like wink, wink, billable credit to maintain this thing now actually has real work to do, and they're not slow, and so they let that kind of slide, and then you get the hallucination in AI, or it's not the work product set you're feeding, it's not up to date, and then there's a problem with it, and then everyone says, oh my gosh, this thing's not as accurate as we thought. The whole thing now is trash. We should stop. Well, no, that overreaction is not good either. So there's got to be this balance, but you're spot on, Bill. Like good KM programs that have a discipline in place to maintain and update, collections is super valuable right now. And certainly where AI is, that's probably the path to success on the practice of law side, is having those curated subsets of work product that you can feed it. Otherwise, you got to go find it and have someone maintain it. And that's not easy.
Yeah, it's neither the hype nor the backlash. It's navigating through that.
Yeah.
And what you're really focused on is building that central source of truth. And you've talked a lot about bringing the data together, but it's also going back the other direction. Once you've created that, you then want to leverage that data and feed it back into your systems.
Yeah. So one of the things that's really exciting is to be kind of rehydrate systems. So if I take my industry code example, right? So if I have a CRM system, an accounting system, and an intake system, and all of a sudden I build this new source of truth that has the one industry code, that is the one above all, how do we get that updated record of data back into the CRM system, back into because as great as a data lake might be, you're still going to have a lot of use cases where people are going directly and still will go to those line of business systems directly to run reports. People are still going to go to Foundation to run reports out of it. People are still going to go out of Elite for data. They're going to go to their line of business system in perpetuity. So being able to build a mechanism by which I can rehydrate, or add data that wasn't previously in there is really exciting. Third-party data.
You've enhanced the data as part of that process. So
That's right. That's
why
right.
don't we make the data better back at its source?
Exactly. And then you get sort of this virtuous loop, right? Where all of a sudden, over time, it's not something you can do, like that. But over time, you start getting this virtuous loop where there's a nice synchronicity around how data starts in a line of business system, gets into the central data platform, we'll call it, and then other data gets improved, and then I can kind of just keep that flow going. One thing we didn't talk about earlier, but I think is also important is, the improvement around third-party data enrichment. Law firms, all these systems rely on data, and you're only as good as the data you bring to the party. And lots of firms are not bringing the best data to bear. And so, how do I accelerate through some of that? Lots of firms subscribe to lots of third-party data feeds. One of the most, kind of common ones we hear about today is how I can take a feed from like a Thomson Reuters or a Lexis or any kind of docket feed and enrich something like Foundation, which is a great starting point. One of the big use cases you see at every firm that has litigation is something as simple as, hey, and I used to see these emails all the time when I was on that side of the fence. How many cases have we had in front of Judge Falk? How many cases have we won in front of Judge Falk? How many cases have we had a motion for summary judgment granted in front of Judge Falk? Well, you pray that someone responds to an email, but that doesn't always happen. You can take these feeds from a third-party vendor that has all the docket data, especially in federal court cases where it's all e-filed, and get that data fed in, and it's normalized and consistent. When you talk to the API vendors that sell this stuff, the biggest challenge when they go to firms is the firms don't know how to accept that data and put it somewhere and rationalize it in a system that lawyers can use. And so getting this data into something like Foundation is great, but what's even better is getting that same data appended to a master central data platform that can feed Foundation, right? So your idea about, hey, if I've updated the data lake or a data platform, I can then now we have a judge attached to this client matter number that we didn't have before because we didn't collect it for whatever reason. Now that judge data can be appended to Foundation. It can go to some Power BI reports. It can go into CRM system. It can go any downstream system I want. So it's that kind of one-to-many enrichment concept that we're seeing more firms get really excited about.
And really, the whole theme of this is that we're talking about a maturation in how firms are viewing data for the purpose of making decisions, right? That's what's really driving this is we need better data so we can make better decisions.
Absolutely. And the maturation is happening at a few levels, right? So it's not just technology, it's not just processes. We're seeing firms invest in people, right? So whether it's data scientists, sometimes that's can be viewed as a cart before the horse dilemma. But I know a very large firm is about to announce what they're calling a chief digital officer, which is really a chief data officer. You got folks like Cindy Barrett, Frost Brown Todd, that is a chief data and innovation officer. And so not all these firms have to be, 3,000 lawyer global firms. They can be firms with a domestic footprint with 400 or 500 lawyers. You see what firms are doing, like Fisher Phillips down in Atlanta, right, where they've gone all in on data. They've DIY'd their own data platform on-prem. They didn't go to the cloud. They're doing amazing things, and that's a combination of collaboration amongst all the different chiefs at the firm, coming up with some strong governance policies, having a person that's spearheading it. So they've got the classic people process technology, kind of game down. You're seeing more and more firms lean into investing in people. Having some concepts around data literacy is really important, like helping firms understand the power of data and also what it takes to maintain and update it. It's not a yeah, everybody thinks it's just a push button thing that happens, in the back office somewhere, and that's not really the way it works. And so we are definitely seeing, a huge increase in firms' understanding of the power of data and what's needed to make it successful for them. And they recognize that it's more than just technology. It's more than just hiring a data scientist and blessing them with the ability to go grab stuff. It's all of the above.
Yeah, I've really been impressed with the investments that I've seen firms now making in IT and innovation groups and the results that those teams are producing. I mean, if when it gets to the point where you can hit a button and get a result, that means somebody did a whole lot of work to make that button.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the sad part is that at the end of it, it is just if it's done right, it is just a push button, and all this magic is going to seem super simple. And I guess that is the sign of a job well done when you make something that's really complex seem really easy.
Yeah, it's another, that investment is really paying off in defining workflows in firms, which is very similar to the data management issue, which is if you're not doing good data management, if you're not defining your processes and documenting them, then it's really hard for any of these things to pay off.
Yeah, I've been doing a lot of reading on this topic, and workflows are, if it's not 1A, it's 1B in terms of where firms are looking at using, whether it's AI or some other kind of supplemental technology. And I would also say that, this is also one of those classic conundrums that firms find themselves in, where you want law firms to invest money in something that's going to automate a process. And when you say automation, that means less billable hours, which means potentially less revenue. So you really got to be thoughtful around how you look at your business model. And that's the other thing I think that's interesting is and I'm not saying it's a sea change, but when you look at process improvement or process automation, you look at workflow, you don't want to cannibalize revenue while you're investing money, right? So you kind of like now you're having a double negative. I'm paying money to make less money. That's not a great business model, right? So how do I identify opportunities to think about things differently, whether it's fixed fee more work, aligning partner compensation to something that resembles a nod towards profitability rather than just bottom line revenue and hours, which doesn't lend itself to firms wanting to automate and make things more efficient. So you're seeing all these sort of things work. We're kind of putting the car together as we're driving it down the freeway in some instances, and that's tricky. But these kinds of events force firms to really reflect on themselves and identify where the soft spots are, and workflow is a huge contributor to how we think about enabling these technologies, and also how firms are thinking about their own kind of internal processes.
Yeah, it's definitely more complicated on the practice of law side. You mentioned the business of law side, which has huge opportunities and all kinds of automation upside, and that's all a win.
Yeah, it's funny. And maybe because it's because I'm not a lawyer, and more focused on the business side that I'm compelled by these. But I also think part of the perk of a business of law use case is that you're not infringing on the intellectual property that lawyers hold dear to themselves, right? So there's always sort of the skepticism that you see with lawyers anytime you try and automate anything they do, and um, the business of law side skirts all that, right? So I'm not infringing on the lawyer's, inalienable right to bill time, right? But there are so many interesting use cases, and I just rattle off a couple that I think are pretty interesting. Something as simple as the annual forecasting and kind of revenue process that CFOs and COOs and managing partners go through. It's very much, more art than science. You can use a lot of tools to help, put some more meat on the bone in terms of how you're forecasting where revenue is coming from, client life cycle. Um, this is a big one that I'm really focused on, and this is a long play, but what characteristics contribute to an associate that's going to be both effective and stay at the firm? Um, you think about the churn that you see at every law firm and how much they spend to, recruit, train, and finally get. I think most people say third year they're kind of breaking even, and then by the fifth year, a lot of them are gone.
Yeah,
That's a terrible model,
huge
right?
investment. Yep.
Right? So imagine if I can just dial that back a little bit and identify in advance students that meet a certain criteria that work at my firm culturally, right? Imagine that at the partner level from a lateral recruiting standpoint. I think most firms would say that if they're at 50-50 between laterals that are successful and laterals that aren't, and that's a every lateral partner you bring on, I don't care how big your firm is or your PPP, that's a seven-figure investment between the head fee you're paying the recruiter, the salary of that person, all the time the partners spend voting on that person, interviewing them. They probably, if they're a big partner, are bringing on a team with them. Imagine
Yep.
just being able to say, "Hey, I'm going to increase your batting average by 10 points." Like that's a huge number to a big firm. Identifying cross-selling opportunities, anomaly detection. This is really fascinating. Going back in time, there are certain events where CIOs have been caught, doing fraudulent activities with vendors. There's been instances most recently in the press where you've seen senior executives asking people in IT to do certain things on the systems that they don't normally do. Imagine having a system that can tell you or alert you to these sort of fraudulent activities that might be happening within the firm. You don't, it's not, they're not always the most, like sexy, exciting stuff, but some of these things are really important. So there's all, doing things, just something as simple as auto classifying a matter by area of law, integrating with Sally, for example. There's lots of processes that we can help support that are more on the business side that won't infringe on what the lawyers are doing, that I think can have just an equal impact on the success of the firm, alongside some of those practice of law use cases that seem to be really saturating the market right now. There's I think a whole other side of the fence that you'll start to see more involvement from firms and vendors on.
Yeah, I've always loved the business of law side. Maybe it has something to do with those reasons. I mean, I'm deep into building workflows these days, and it's amazing how much data is in there that you can take advantage of, that you can really make you can move the needle for firms by leveraging data they've already got and just making those processes better.
Well, you've been in this business a minute or two. What is the biggest sort of epiphany you've seen over the last couple of years when it comes to data?
Well, I think the most important thing is the change in the view of its importance, which you've been talking about. I mean, we have, there's the joke in this market of this we're running a law firm here, not a business, and that is, that's changing, and that's a very positive thing. And so you're seeing a lot. You talked about new leadership. That new leadership comes in and asks new questions, which makes a huge difference. And I'm seeing that across firms of all sizes. So it's not just a large firm thing. It's not just a mid-sized firm thing. It's a it is a change that's happening in the market. And I think it needs to happen because we're seeing the combination of AI and regulatory change is really the first thing I've seen that has a long-term potential to really create competitive pressure for law firms that's unlike anything they have felt before. And now is the time to be building that infrastructure and foundation so that you're in the right place to win that fight.
It's interesting you mentioned sort of the long term. When at Iltis, someone was mentioning the last time we saw something as white hot as AI was blockchain. You don't hear much about blockchain anymore, right? But for a minute, that was all people could talk about. And I feel like AI, to your point, I feel like this is different. I don't think this is going to be, may not be as big of an impact as we think, but it's certainly not going to go by the wayside where we don't talk about that anymore, really. I mean, it's not, I mean, it's there, blockchain's there. It's not like it's the technology's gone away. We just don't have this fever pitch focus on it like we did a few years ago. Um,
I think AI is going to become like the internet in two important ways. One is it'll be close to the same level of importance long term. We're talking very long term.
yeah,
And two, we don't sit around talking about the internet all the time because it's just sort of in the fabric. And that's going to be the same thing with AI. AI is just software, and it's most useful when it's just an ingredient in something else. When it is this brand new separate thing is when it's most raw and most problematic. That's the phase we're at right now with generative AI.
yeah, yeah. It's interesting. I was reading something else you wrote around prompt and Gen AI. The just the consumption levels, and are we being thoughtful around long term? Is this the best tool for the job every time? Because there are some costs associated. There are hard costs. Microsoft is charging a premium for these services. I think the Copilot inside of Office is an extra $30 per user per month,
Right.
which doesn't sound like a lot, but that is a lot of money on top of your EA or whatever they're calling it these days. And then there's also the other costs, right? I think you said a Fiji bottle of water for every X number of prompts on top of a base query inside a GPT every time you run it. Like that's not nothing over time.
Yeah, just
Um,
the processing, just the water required to keep the computers cool in order to support the processing necessary. I mean, it's like bringing a bulldozer to a party when what you need is a shovel. There's so
yeah,
many use cases where generative AI is just so oversized to the problem. And of course, we're going to get much better at that, right? We're going to get better at sending, okay, this particular prompt or this particular issue can be dealt with a much simpler level of technology effectively because we have the history to know that and pick the right routing for it.
yeah, it was interesting. I was reading an article this morning where a lawyer kind of was going through all the use cases, and it just dawned on me based on a conversation I'd had with a customer earlier was what you're talking about actually would be much better served by just an old school document assembly. Like pick one off the shelf that you probably already have one you're paying for that you just need to dust off and use. Like you'd be much better off using that than AI. You'll have much better results, more accurate results. It's not sexy. Um, but yeah, it'll be interesting to see where everything kind of evens out. That's the part that I think you're alluding to, Bill. Is like we're kind of we're in that sort of up and down cycle with AI. Um, yeah, it's we've only been in this what 6 7 months, so it'll be interesting to see a year from now what we're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, ChatGPT was released 10 months ago. It seems like we're in a different world because of that. If what you do is live in this, Brian Inkster makes a really interesting point about document assembly versus generative AI, which is document assembly is this really great technology that works really well. We know exactly how to use it, but we don't really use it.
Yeah, fair.
Why is this going to be different? And I think it's a great question.
Yeah, and again, that's maybe where we get off the AI hype. There's this sort of a leveling off of everything has to be generative, everything has to be AI. And maybe the hype of that also sort of reintroduces us, right, to systems that we've had in the firm forever. Or processes, like you mentioned earlier, having a good knowledge management function will support this. Maybe this helps sort of reintroduce firms to the notion that I do need to have a really solid knowledge management capability to take advantage of AI in any form going forward. So that'll be interesting to see how that all shakes out.
Yeah, I think it's going to take a lot longer to play out than people are predicting.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, Tom, this has been a whole lot of fun. I appreciate you doing this.
Oh, my pleasure. It's great.
We
Thank
keep
you
talking
for
for forever.
I know. I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to chat with you a little bit. It's been fun.
Thanks.